Welcome to Movie Bounce with Mike and Harry, where we'll bounce from movie to movie.
From actor, writer, director, any which way.
Who knows where we'll bounce to next?
Okay, Mike, what movie are we talking about today?
We're talking about the Joker. I had you take the lead on this one, and I like the way you kind of introduced that there. Yeah, I think we're talking about the Joker. Do you want to talk about something else?
It's really interesting because I think in the last 10 years or so, I mean, the Joker was always an iconic villain for Batman. He always represented a lot. And in the last 10 years, I want to say he's just become so mythic, like even more so. And people have really tried to use him to tell stories that are more intelligent, that are deeper, etc. I've seen all your different Jokers. I've seen, your Mark Hamill Joker on the animated series, obviously Jack Nicholson. At this point, we've had Heath Ledger. In comics, you've got Joker written by Alan Moore. You've got him written by, just from the first appearance all the way down to how he's depicted now. Like I've seen dozens of Jokers, right? So for me to hear that they were going to make like a standalone Joker movie, I kind of rolled my eyes at that, I have to say. So that's me kind of approaching this movie. And the run up to it, obviously, like when was the first chatter about this movie? Like how many years before its release?
Two, I think, because this came out in October of 2019. I think, yeah, it was probably maybe like a year and a half prior to.
Right. So immediately my opinion was, why are you making a Joker movie? Like what possible value can it have? And then they started talking about how, Robert De Niro's on board and it's going to have this particular slant to it. And it's not going to be a typical comic book movie. So, clearly there was a lot being thrown out there leading up to first trailer, first images, all of that stuff. So there was a lot of messaging ahead of time to make you think that this movie was going to be perhaps more sophisticated than most comic book movies.
Again, the narrative of this movie is we're gonna be following this villain. Like, all right, so immediately you think, is Batman gonna be in this, and he's seen as a minor character? Yeah, too many questions, as the Riddler would say in Batman Forever.
Exactly.
But
right, exactly.
but I was just like, whatever. And especially when I heard those involved, it was very strange to know that Todd Phillips was directing it, and I can go into that a little bit later. But yeah, just from my perspective, not being brought up on reading comic books growing up, I was pretty damn confused, as you probably were.
Yeah, and then as you got more information, you started to get a sense of this was going to be a bit more gritty. It was going to be a bit more psychological. What started getting thrown around, which I will actually argue to its detriment, was when people started to pull in Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. Because once they started to bring that into the narrative about this movie, people really latched on to it. And I'm going to say, just right off the bat,
When did that chatter hit you in terms of the approach from the Taxi Driver and the King of Comedy angle? Was that from the screenwriter coming out there and saying that in the press, or was that from?
that's a great question. And I'm going to probably say it was like leading up to before people were screening it. So I think
So before anyone has watched the movie, so that okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was. I think if I heard the chatter, I'm trying to now think about it. I think it was after. I think it played at Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival. No,
it might have been like, it might have been right around there. They might have dovetailed into each other. But in my opinion, I feel like that was kind of a bit of a death knell for this movie. And what I really want to say is it's no longer a movie. It's kind of a line in the sand, right? There are people who love this movie and there are people who hate it. And it's kind of become almost like how your opinion on this movie defines you as a person. So if you love this movie, you're going to argue that it's very sophisticated and it's very deep. And then if you're on the other side, then you're going to argue that this movie is not. And you're going to proudly say that this movie is stupid, et cetera. And I don't think either side is correct. I feel like the people who argue that it's like Taxi Driver in a positive way, it's like, well, it's not. And you can't argue that it's like the King of Comedy either, because because why? Because you have an unsuccessful comedian and Robert De Niro's in it. Like those movies don't really connect with this, but it's an easy way to try to elevate the conversation about the movie. If you're pro this movie, you're going to point to these amazing movies by Scorsese, etc., that you can say, oh no, it's as good as this, or you can say it's derivative of these two. But I don't think either argument works in this case.
I think that the catch there is that the writer-director Todd Phillips in interviews had stole the thunder and flat out said it's an homage to those movies. I think he had to have, because had he not done that leading up, when it was released, then people would be indicting it. They'd be like, you're ripping off King of Comedy. You're ripping off these movies. So he obviously had to present it before the movie was screened, say, hey, listen, this is his homage to Scorsese. And I might be paraphrasing him here, but he was the one who brought up those two movies. And then the press kind of rolled with it. And then, of course, we've seen the movie, and then you definitely see those where he layered the film with those homages.
Yeah, but I'm going to flat out and say that that's wrong. So I'm going to say that
wrong with him doing that, or wrong of us receiving it?
If Todd Phillips said that this movie is an homage to the King of Comedy, I'm going to question if he saw that movie, because that movie is about a stalker, and it's about someone projecting themselves onto someone else who desperately wants to be like their hero, and that's not what the Joker is whatsoever. The link to King of Comedy ends with it's about a comedian who's not funny. Who has, like, okay.
But you at least see the comedy in this character in the King of Comedy going, okay, you can see him traveling a little bit far with his material. Not that far. Not to the point where he'd be a late night talk show host. But you can't see that with the Arthur Fleck character in the Todd Phillips movie. It's an open mic night that's gone horrible, and there are many of those. So you can kind of see that there are different levels of, and of course this one's dealing here's the thing. I don't think that the homage that I mentioned, and it could have been me just not, I don't recall word for word what Todd Phillips has said, though he did mention that these two movies, he was paying tribute to them, I guess, in this movie. And there are those scenes that are flat out seem like they were taken from King of Comedy,
but I will say, so King of Comedy is perhaps my wife's favorite movie. So I'm very well versed with it, and I would say that any connection to it is very specious. Like it doesn't rip off of it, and frankly, I don't even really see it too much as an homage. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, to say that, it kind of gives you a little bit of notoriety, right? Because you're then attaching this movie to a movie by Scorsese. And perhaps like the idea of like hipster cred, like, let's be truly honest. Like, how many people have really seen the King of Comedy? Like, probably not that much. If he said Goodfellas, if he said Casino, like, that's a completely different ballgame. But like, the King of Comedy is one of Scorsese's kind of forgotten movies for most people. I think movie buffs have seen it. I think they're familiar with it. But again, I don't think Todd Phillips had that in mind. I think he was going out there. He knew what he was saying. He wanted to kind of generate buzz, and I don't think it necessarily works. Certainly, from my perspective, it doesn't.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. If we talk about this movie, we can kind of aim with what we've been kind of focused on. I know I sometimes get interested behind, well, what was everything leading up, the momentum leading up to the release of this movie. And there was a lot with this movie, not just what we're describing with what was said in the interviews, and also the feedback from the festivals, but there's the press, how they got involved with it. And the thing is, at the end of the day, and again, I get fascinated by that, like we talked about with Con Air and The Rock to some degree, but at the end of the day, it's all about, well, what did you see within those 2 hours? None of that stuff really, that hype and all that stuff really kind of matters. For me, movie trailers even build up the hype where I'm like, ooh, it's this is going to be this type of movie. And sometimes the trailers, obviously, as you know, a lot of movies, fake you out and they turn out to be something completely different.
Right.
So if we just, we can talk. Do you want to dive further into everything leading up to the release of this movie, or should we dive into the 2 hours of what we consumed while watching this movie?
I think they're part and parcel. Okay. They're kind of the same, because yeah, of course, those trailers, that hype, it creates a mindset that you enter the movie with.
Right.
It's kind of baggage that you bring to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like just to level set, you know, I think it's not surprising if I were to say that I thought the cinematography was very good.
Amazing. No,
Yeah,
he's
amazing,
Lawrence
right?
Shear, the cinematographer. He's done. I remember from early on when he did Garden State, the Zach Braff movie.
Okay.
If you there's some images that, you know, I like the movie. It's not an amazing movie, but there are certain images that are just so stuck in my mind. It's great. Absolutely, the cinematography of this movie is amazing.
And look, it's Joaquin Phoenix's performance was wonderful. It was really, really well done. So already, I would say if you looked at like a pie chart, you've already got a huge percentage of what can make this movie good.
And a lot of the credit is due to Todd Phillips,
Right?
Hiring that cinematographer, of course,
Right.
Joaquin Phoenix.
But like, then let's compare it to the other elements of the film. The script was not the best, and I do want to say that for a comic movie, it was probably better than a comic book movie could be. It was certainly better than what a DC comic movie could be. And
well, what elements do you have in terms of when you go to see a comic book movie? What is that in your mind? What it could be, the highest it can attain? What is it? What do you expect that movie to? Yeah, what do you expect that movie? Any specific elements to be included in that?
So for a comic book movie, so for me coming in as a comic book fan, generally, it should be as true to the source material as makes sense for a film. So I can definitely recognize that you can't follow a particular comic 100% because you have so much going on there. You've got, you know, Batman's been running for how many decades? Like, I'm thinking now he's got to be like 90 years old running almost, like, you know, from the early 30s or whatever. I'm completely butchering my timeline and perhaps sacrificing my credibility, but you know what I mean. Like, these comics change and they evolve, and every generation has their own Batman, right? Like, if you grew up in the 70s, then you have something different than, say, someone like myself who grew up in like the 80s, Frank Miller, you know, all that stuff. So, you know, one aspect of it is how much are you capturing the source material in a way that's very authentic to that, capturing the essence of the character. And the other is similar to any movie. Like, are you making these characters believable? Are you investing? Am I invested in this movie? And I don't think the Joker does justice for either of those aspects that much, but I really liked what they presented for the most part. Again, in terms of the atmosphere of the movie, in terms of the character. But I will say that the movie goes off the rails, especially in like as you enter that third act.
Okay, well, let me ask you the 2 points you just brought up. The first being, you know, staying true to the character from the source material. Now, I'll challenge that a little bit because I'll say, well, what if Todd Phillips hypothetically just chose not to? So he understands the comic, and, you know, he's read them all, but he just shows, well, I've never seen this character portrayed in this particular way. And he'd explored that in a screenplay. And it's something that no one's ever seen before. Name's Joker, and there are certain elements that are in play, but it's not specifically true to the source material all 100%. And even maybe not a majority of. But if it turns out to be a great film on its own, would you ding the movie because it wasn't true to its source material?
So that's an excellent question because I feel like this is a Joker that I have not seen before. So we've seen a slightly sympathetic Joker and Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, where you kind of get the sense that the actions that led up to him becoming the Joker were sympathetic. You know, in that story, just to quickly run it down, he got engaged in this heist because he wanted to support his wife and, you know, his newborn baby and blah, blah, blah. So it kind of humanized the character a bit. So this goes that route. But what I liked about this movie is I feel like The Killing Joke just kind of went from like normal guy, he had a bad day, he went completely criminally insane. This movie is a lot more believable because he's struggling, he has issues, that tipping point from Arthur Fleck to the Joker seemed, in my opinion, a bit more believable. So I will give props to the movie for that setup.
Okay, I mean, I'm one who my only exposure to the Joker is from the cinematic angle. You know,
Right.
we talked about '89 Batman and how it's not true to the source material, but I went with it because of the movie that Tim Burton was trying to tell. I roll with it, and there's a core to that I really connected with, in terms of putting myself in the shoes of Bruce Wayne's character and the impact that the Joker had made on his life to some degree, and so I kind of go, okay, that worked for me. But I know a lot of fans from the comic book didn't like that. And then, of course, my exposure with the Suicide Squad, you know, where he which is just it doesn't resonate at all. It's still I can't. I'm surprised. I'm just surprised still by that performance and how that movie was edited. But the Joker that I like the most was mostly from Chris Nolan's Batman, The Dark Knight, and the fact that the backstory was like, he'd have a few stories and you just didn't know that it was a mystery. I actually like that more. And as I rewatched The Dark Knight, one specific scene after you've heard that, you know, he gives brief backstories and they're all different, and then you just see this when he burns that pile of money and he's just surrounded by this fire. And he's got this look like you don't know what the hell's going on behind in his mind and how crazy he is. I loved that. That's me. That's my preference. So even though I love that, you know, I'm not expecting Todd Phillips to be in line with that archetype, with that specific character. I'm like open-minded to seeing, okay, what can he bring something new. I'm all on board from minute one of this movie. You know, lead the narrative here. Let's see where this go. I'm incredibly optimistic. So when you went into this movie, what was your mindset before when you bought the ticket?
So my mindset was more about, we're going to kind of see the true origin of the Joker, because I don't think that the Joker in Batman '89 was particularly convincing. It was basically, you know, Jack Nicholson as kind of a greasy kind of gangster dude, and then he just turned into the Joker. Like, it was never believable for me. Like, I couldn't see that point where he just kind of cracked. You know, like I just didn't get it. It wasn't believable. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of that movie, because again, like, the Joker just doesn't speak to me. It's not something that I bought in the movie. Heath Ledger worked really well because, you know, perhaps Nolan knew that it would be very difficult to show that transition and that transformation. So he just said, all right, look, here's the Joker. Like, we're not going to talk about how he became that way, but here's this monster, and we're going to follow the monster. So in this movie, they decided that, like, well, we are going to show you that transformation, and because they devoted an entire movie to it, like, I would have been very disappointed if they dropped the ball on that. And largely, they did a good job. I have a lot of criticism to the movie overall, but I would say that going from Arthur Fleck to the Joker was probably not what I thought was bad about the movie.
Okay. I think, just to defend Batman '89 for a second, I think with the Jack Napier character that they set up, you can't sympathize with this character. Like, you know, in terms of the transformation and what you expected of that, I don't know what you could be expecting, but that could be your problem with the setup of the Jack Napier character, by going, well, even if they attempted to kind of have you kind of invest with, oh, you can kind of see things from his angles. He's Jack Napier, you know, he's this gangster. I think it was just different for what they were going for and what they were trying to achieve. And we can do a separate podcast on that. But I just saying I disagree with you a little bit with your take on '89. But again, you kind of go in with that movie, and I can see how you're disappointed based off of what you just mentioned with the Killing Joke and kind of what you're expecting with this Todd Phillips Joker movie to.
I want to tug on the thread of '89 Batman, not to derail the conversation, but to kind of inform the discussion on the Joker. Would you say, like, the way that you could probably see Jack Napier behaving the way the Joker behaves, even if he didn't have that accident? Like, would you agree with that, or do you think that's completely off
But I
base?
think that he would be, but it's someone who's lost their grasp of reality to some degree because he just was. I mean, this again, it's a comic book movie, but he was just dumped into a vat of the chemicals. Yeah, I
Right.
go within the world that they've created, within the world that New Burton's created, not in this world that we live in. Yeah,
Okay. So what's interesting about that is that in many ways, in a lot of ways, 89 Batman is the more comic booky movie
right.
because he has this accident and then boom, like it's his origin. Like there are many stories in comic books which a lot of these movies are based on where the origin story is basically you have this literally this one incident that creates a character, whether it's a hero or a villain. And I think the Joker is a more gradual origin, which is slightly more realistic and therefore less comic booky. Because whether or not you and I agree that this is a psychological character study about Arthur Fleck and how society fails him and how our systems fail like the mentally ill, that's another discussion, but it at least tries for that, which I do
We're
commend.
talking about it now in a different climate because it's been over 6 months since it's been released. And I think at the time that it was, I mean, I know we spoke about everything leading up to the movie's release, but even after it was released, just the feedback from coworkers, from everyone else you talked to about it, the thing that did resonate with them are those themes that you just mentioned that it does cover, and we're going to dive into in a little bit. But there was such a strong passion from everyone's kind of take on the movie. Even some people that haven't seen the movie and just heard other people talking about it, they had a strong take on it. I was like, whoa,
Right.
whoa, whoa. Like, and even like I saw Parasite that same month, right before it's it was playing in a few
Hmm.
theaters in the
Hmm.
city, and a few other people that saw that. Some of them would totally agree that they love Parasite. They'd disagree. We talk about how the Joker kind of failed to have to be as focused as Parasite. But anyway, we'll go on that a little bit. But the thing is, the chatter afterwards was so strong, and everyone had a very strong opinion about the movie, which is rare, to the film's credit. But yeah, did that impact you in any way in terms of everyone else talking about the movie after the film has been released?
I have to say that I was completely sick of hearing about the movie from either camp. Like on my Instagram feed, I was sick of all like the pro Joker movie memes, but I was equally as sick as people kind of like just completely swatting it down. Like as I said before, it just became like this badge. Like you were, if you were for Joker, it meant something, and if you were anti the movie, it meant something. And it was just like we weren't really talking about the movie anymore, right? We were just talking about like how we were using it to bolster our own identity on social media. And maybe that was just my opinion, but like I just felt like it's like, oh, this conversation is no longer about the movie. It's just about X, Y, and Z.
Right, and all the comic book movies that have been released over the last 10 years didn't they didn't. I'm trying to think of one, but I don't think they really even took the step to even tackle some of the topics this movie brings up. Not to the extent that it does, at least. So we really haven't had another movie that brought these topics to the forefront where that was something that people were talking about to the degree that they did after the Joker was released. Which after that happened, I'm like, oh man, expecting 2 years from now, there are going to be a lot of movies that, that attempt the same, that go down, that try to go down that same path.
Well, we can only hope. I mean, like, let's look beyond superhero comics,
But
right? Like,
Parasite,
well, yeah, Parasite's
mhm,
great, but like there's such a wide variety of comics that aren't superhero related, that are very serious, that are definitely worth being made into movies, and they're not for a lot of reasons. They don't have a recognizable IP
right.
or who whatever the fact is. I will at least give credit to the Joker that it tried to be a bit more than what a superhero movie, or I don't even want to say superhero, right? A comic book movie could be. However, it it didn't it didn't have the confidence to see it through. And we talk a bit about confidence in movies.
Right.
I didn't think it needed to have all of those. Like it
Did it
didn't
need to
need to
have the
have
name Joker to it. I think that was the first text I sent to you after I watched the movie for the first time. Is that why did this movie have to be called Joker? If you're tackling these themes, if you're exploring all this, within this screenplay, why do you tack on the name Joker? Why do you force in a Thomas Wayne, a subplot?
Right. The Thomas Wayne, the Bruce Wayne subplot was completely awful. I was totally fine with it being a Joker movie because there is some benefit to kind of like in the back of your head, what the Joker means. So if you're showing how he becomes what he becomes, and it's like, okay, yeah. But I didn't think it was necessary to have that whole Wayne family drama attached to it. I thought that towards the end of the movie to show the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne was completely just like amateurish, like so hackneyed, and that killed the movie. Like if I had any goodwill towards that movie, it was completely destroyed at that scene.
Well, it said a lot because for me, that was just slapped on there, and there are movies we've seen where that's happened. Like you mentioned, Suicide Squad. There's a ton of shit. It's a ton of stuff slapped into that movie. It was a complete mess. But that happened here in this case, and that was just one instance. Okay, but yeah, I mean that was just one of the things. But we can talk about the good. Should we dive right into the film, or should we go to a little bit of a I can tell you, in terms of my perspective, in terms of what I was expecting out of the movie, is that I going in again didn't read the comics, just went off the the cinematic version of the character of Joker, but I think that I just kind of went in. I just saw the trailers and heard a little bit of the chatter, but didn't kind of dive too much into it. But and I heard that it got a lot of praise coming out of one of the festivals. And then I just knew mostly I look at who's writing the screenplay. I look at who's directing it and who's in it. And Todd Phillips the first movie he had ever made was a documentary called Hated, a documentary about Gigi Allen. I haven't seen it, but
oh wow, okay, interesting.
And
okay.
you might want to see. I think that's more kind of down your alley there. But I don't know why I haven't seen it. Maybe it's just not easily accessible in streaming. But I do want to see it. But I've seen every one of his other movies, starting with Road Trip, which came out a year after American Pie, and it was
I saw that
Stifler in it as well.
Yeah. That's insane.
I liked it. It was fun. It was I think Ivan Reitman produced that movie as well. I didn't
Wow.
Tom Green was in it. I had a blast. Even though like as soon as I saw the marketing, the poster for it and stuff like that, I was like, okay, it seems like they're just trying to cash in on American Pie's success.
Right.
But then he did, and I liked it. I thought it was a fine movie. But then I watched Old School came out a few years later, and that was just. I loved it. He just again going back to earlier on, like he cast that movie incredibly well by getting Will Ferrell in one of the main roles as well as Vince Vaughn.
Right.
I think the year afterwards he did a movie. He did Starsky and Hutch, and I haven't seen the original show, but I know we saw Starsky and Hutch. I went in. I think right after we watched the Ben Stiller show. It was just we were just getting such a high off of watching that, where we watched Starsky and Hutch, not knowing what to expect. But the thing is, hysterical. I thought I didn't know. I was just surprised by how funny the movie was, and of course, Stiller brought back one of his old characters from the Ben Stiller show and literally had it on their display in the movie. The do it, do it, no, do it. So when we
like not to derail this conversation about the Joker, but we went to see that movie after I had reconstructive nerve surgery on my mouth, and I was completely in a funk, and I'm like, all right, let's go see this movie. And yeah, it was good. Like I really enjoyed it. So
fun.
It's hilarious.
Couldn't wait to see. We saw it at a sneak preview as well.
We did.
So so excited. Like days, I want to see this again. Yep. I just had a blast. And even that scene where I said that you had the Ben Stiller do it guy threw in it. Okay, it was slapped on there as well, but. I got the sense that Todd Phillips is like I just want to make this movie as funny. He's casting these movies really well with Owen Wilson, Ben Stiller, and even Will Ferrell's in it, and Vince Vaughn.
Right.
And then after that, there was Old School for Scoundrels, which was again when you cast a male lead and you choose John Heder after Napoleon Dynamite, where that actor doesn't have, from what we've seen, we haven't seen too much range from him, but he was paired with Billy Bob Thornton, and Thornton was great because this is coming off of Bad Santa. So again, I've seen with all of his movies that he's trying to make the best comedy as possible, and a lot of the times it hits. Sometimes it doesn't. School for Scoundrels was a fine movie, but then he made The Hangover years later, casting Zach Galifianakis, who was pretty much an unknown prior to, and even Bradley Cooper and Ed Helms.
Right.
He struck a chord because that movie was a huge hit, spawned 2 sequels, and then he made War Dogs, and then he made this film. So in other words, I loved from what Todd Phillips was making after Old School and Starsky and Hutch. I was like, this guy's going to bring it. He's going to try to make the best product possible. So I kind of went in with those expectations prior to Joker. So that's where I was. You had the comic book background. I had more of the who's the writer, the director, and that was Todd Phillips in this case. Where's he coming from? And I know he's gonna bring the best product possible here.
Right. Well, considering his pedigree, I would say that he did a surprisingly good job.
In a different genre.
Exactly. Like he completely switched gears. I think the movie really did not benefit from trying to shoehorn too much of the Batman mythos into it.
Right.
So that was one detriment to it. It was a little heavy-handed too, of course, and I would probably forgive it, but for the fact that, again, like they tried to kind of really push it into the Batman universe, like you got the sense that they were trying to seed in sequels, and I did not appreciate that.
Well, I mean, it does add up. When you talk about, the point in the film where Arthur Fleck shows up at the Wayne Mansion, then you're already taking and he's sticking his fingers in a kid's mouth. This movie could have been more focused.
Well, that the scenes that you just described, like they completely pull your focus away from the movie.
Yeah.
It's just like suddenly you're presented with this, you're forced to see it, and your brain is just going to be stuck on that, right? Because I'm going to say that 90% of the audience is aware of the whole Batman connection, if not 100%, right? So that's already there. It's almost amateurish to draw any more attention to it because it's already that you don't need to do anything.
Right.
Already in the audience's mind. So there's no need to go that far with it.
Unless you're going to take a different path. If you set it up, take a totally different path, which they didn't. They went down the same path that you've seen in the Zack Snyder version of Batman versus Superman, the Wayne family death, all that. They didn't. I mean, they took a little bit of a different path by hinting at the fact that Arthur Fleck could be Bruce Wayne's brother, and they didn't really commit to that.
Which is kind of stupid because you don't need that connection. Just as I don't agree with in Batman '89 that Jack Napier killed Bruce Wayne's parents. Like you don't need that. Like there's enough in the characters to link them together that you don't need to start creating stuff out of thin air. Like again, that wasn't in the comics. They didn't need it in the comics. Like the Joker was a very successful, very fleshed out character without those connections. So like to bring it into the movies, it's just like, why do you need to do that? Don't you have confidence in the source material?
Like I just said, I'm going in this movie expecting Todd Phillips switching genres to bring the best possible product, especially in this case he's diving into the DC universe, but he's bringing up from the very beginning, you're tackling mental illness. And you start off with the uncontrollable laugh that he has, that in the movie they don't even state the name for it, but I believe it's called pseudobulbar. It's a real condition. But the movie doesn't commit to really, even stating the name on that. But then it brings up the fact that he has, he's taking, Arthur Fleck, the main character, is taking over a dozen medications and such. And he's got a joke book that looks like, it's the most cliched book you can imagine. And it has even nudie pictures in there. And,
right.
So it's just like, okay, what is that going to... And so this is all kind of adding up. And then he's visiting a social worker, where, you're getting a glimpse into terms, I think at one point the social worker says that the services program will be pulled. So, okay, what is this movie? I guess the movie's kind of on this track. We're going to dive into this a little bit. And then, but later on in the movie, his mother seems like she's also been suffering from a mental illness because she's obviously, I guess, hallucinating that she had this relationship with Thomas Wayne, leading to what we discussed, that the possibility of her being of Arthur being Bruce Wayne's brother. So But then you find out that Arthur's mother had actually been lying to him, and that, of course, enrages Arthur. And later on, you find out that he discovers that he has also been a victim of abuse by the mother's boyfriends when he was a kid, or he was tied to a radiator and beat up. So this movie is tackling some really heavy themes. So you set all this up, and as a viewer on my end, again, and I'm going, oh, this is also a DC movie, but I'm just dealing with what the narrative, where we're going with this. But then it does take a turn down the Thomas Wayne narrative. I'm like, okay, all right, you're going to dive further with this, but where are we going here? And you're even introducing Alfred into the mix. What are we doing? And then, I think that the ultimate problem I have with the film is, of course, within the third act. Should we dive into there now, or do you want to? I want to take a break here. If you want to comment on something I had mentioned up until this point, but my big problems are especially with the third act.
The thing that I wanted to say is that as I've had like a couple of different lives with various jobs that I've had or whatever, and I've encountered people like Arthur Fleck. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned like the joke book and all that stuff. Like I've seen people who were there, right? Who have this like book with them, and like it just has stuff in there that like would seem insane to everyone, but it's super important to them.
Right.
And like
personal.
You have no idea what their background is, whatever abuse they've encountered, what their situation is. For me, that's very real.
Right.
But what I did not appreciate is when you start to try to shoehorn in a normal kind of comic book narrative. Like you're starting to kind of try to put Thomas Wayne in there. You're starting to shoehorn Bruce Wayne in there. You don't really need that. Like again, I hate to keep using the same term. Where was the confidence? Like you had something there. You didn't need that. Like the movie would have been completely fine without those connections.
Right.
So that to me was a big failure on the part of the movie because, clearly there was enough content, there was enough of believability, there was enough pathos where the story of Arthur Fleck becoming Joker did not need to have Thomas Wayne and Bruce Wayne as this tipping point.
There's a scene where Thomas Wayne's on TV making a statement about those that, I guess, those that rose up against the rich. I guess he called them clowns, and that's what set off a good portion of the community, and which will eventually lead at the end of the movie to that community kind of supporting Joker. But again, that's kind of like, okay, this is where they're going to throw in that Thomas Wayne narrative, but that's going to be the first main piece where it's going to be connected. And then, of course, you have the letters tying that in together, and then eventually you're going to lead to Arthur Fleck trying to track down Thomas Wayne into the mansion and all that. So they didn't totally slap that whole narrative on right there. I mean, it was the ending, the death that I think that did. So they really tried to tie this into the DC universe that way. I understand you totally didn't appreciate that. And I agree, because I think this makes this less focused. It's a thread that's like, okay, well, what are you committing to here, with the script? Mm-hmm. And it just seems like, no, you're going down you have too many other avenues here. And another one that we're going to dive into in a little bit. But again, I still stick with this movie shouldn't have been called Joker. They should not have had the Thomas Wayne subplot. And it would have been just a little bit more focused, but still not quite.
I think I don't have a problem with the movie being called The Joker. I think there's no need to be that precious with the Batman mythos. Mm-hmm. You can have the Joker kind of doing his own stuff and then eventually intersecting with Batman. They don't need to cross paths that early on in their history, right?
There's no racing. It's not a race because
it's not a race. Yeah, it's like you can do your own thing and I'll do my own thing, and then eventually we'll like fight each other. But we don't need to be that connected like so soon in our history.
Right. No. But they have to come to the movie theater and then we have to get someone to kill.
But that's my point. It just shows it's. I don't know who made that decision, right? Like you could say
could have been studio interference.
Exactly. Like they said, well, no, we need to connect this to Batman. Like, because like, I mean, I've kind of skirted around this in previous episodes. I really have an issue with movies that disrespect the audience.
Right.
And this movie, it actually at this point starts to disrespect the audience.
Yeah, so along the way, I feel like it lost. For me, I was, I'm compelled by the movie because of Joaquin Phoenix's performance. Like, you can
Yeah,
take him. There are many movies prior to, like The Master, we talked about, where you can have problems with the movie, its pacing, but Joaquin Phoenix you're on board because of him, and he'll make it work, and he's the most compelling element of this movie. But I totally feel as I'm watching it, I'm like, again, where are we going? Okay, I'm following, but then the movie introduces other characters, like his someone else on his floor. Zazie Beetz plays this girl. This woman that the narrative kind of leads to, implying that they're developing a relationship, and this is where the
right.
King of Comedy element kind of comes into play, because then you have that scene where he imagines that he's at the Robert De Niro's late night talk show, that episode. And okay, he's directly lifting that from King of Comedy. Todd Phillips is doing that. And I'm like, okay, now you're throwing this into the mix. Now you're slapping King of Comedy in here. And then this relationship, and you already assume that this is all going on in his head, the relationship with Zazie Beetz, because they're not developing anything with her character at all, really. Only montages, I believe. And that's unfortunate, because she's a great actress. She was in Deadpool 2, and I would have loved to have seen from her in this
But
movie.
I
But
think
it doesn't,
actually, I think she did such a great job because I feel like everybody in that movie was so dead inside. And
Deadpool 2, or are you
I'm
talking about
sorry,
this
in
movie?
the Joker, and it
Oh,
just contributed more to that atmosphere of like everybody's just kind of like they're just scraping through. Like everybody in that movie is just struggling. And the movie, for me, when I think back about this movie, it's more about the atmosphere.
yeah,
And if there's one thing this movie pulls off, it's that.
yeah.
It's through all of the performances, it's through the cinematography, it's through the shots, it's through the setting, and it definitely delivers on that.
What about the score? I like some of the score. Even in The Dark Knight, the score there was very uneasy, and here it is as well. I like the score. I think even leading up to the ending, it worked for me. But at some points, I get the point. It's there to make you feel uncomfortable there as
I would
well.
definitely agree. And you know what I think about, and I haven't really reconciled, is like the Gary Glitter song when he's on the
Yeah.
stairs.
Oh, because the history behind.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, besides the fact that Gary Glitter himself is a monster, but
Yeah.
and I wonder if that was considered when they did that, right? Because if you're just thinking about it and if you're just watching the scene, you're that song's been used in like the Mighty Ducks, and
Right.
like it's meant to evoke this sense of like victory, or like I'm giving it my all. But I think, and I would love to imagine, that the filmmakers knew like there was other layers there, and they kind of put that in there because like it's if you think about the history of the artist, it's a creepy song then, right? Like
Mm,
it's kind of icky.
yeah. Okay. I don't. I only know so much about the history behind it, so I'm trying to think in terms of what you're setting up. Like, if there are more layers to that and how it connects with
Yeah,
the
I mean,
movie. I don't know.
basically, like, without getting too much into it, like Gary Glitter is more or less like a gross
Right.
pedophile. He's been around like doing terrible things, and yeah, like that's as quick and as deep as I feel like
Okay.
going into right now.
Okay. All right. Then there's that, and then you can say, is that where this movie is kind of going in that direction, where this Joker, can still be out there doing these horrible things, and that's where maybe in Joker 2, 3, because there will be sequels to this movie, that could
Can you
be.
imagine what like Joker 3 is going to be about?
But it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. Again, with the tone of this movie, with everything of this narrative is setting up, it's not setting up a second movie. I don't think. Like I can't imagine where the tone is going to go there. I don't know. How much further can we consume of this character
Right,
that they've
right,
set up?
right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the big challenge that they had. Like, we were talking about, were the big questions we had when we first heard they were going to make this movie. I have more questions about Joker too, and I'm like, all right, whatever. We'll see. But I think that even that scene you're talking about, the staircase scene, as it is a great scene, and boom, that music kicks in. Hey, I played in basketball growing up, and that song was always playing, and I was already boom connected to it. Took me right there. But I'm like, it's not even in line with everything else in the movie. But I'm like, okay, it's right after he snapped. He just killed his mother. So, and the thing that I don't get about this movie, and why I wish I wanted to go in loving this movie. I wanted to come out loving this movie. But what made it so frustrating was that, the arc of the character, the movie, where he makes that huge plunge, is right after he discussed, he found out that he was abused as a kid, and he found out what his mother was doing, and then he killed her. And that's something he would never have done. He was taking care of her throughout this whole movie. And that's where he snaps. And then, of course, his coworkers come to his place, and then he kills one of them, and he's totally gone off. He says that he went off his meds. And then, the movie takes a different path right now, and then he's already planning on going on Robert De Niro's show and committing suicide on the air. How are you feeling about this movie up until this point?
So the scene where he kills his mom, and I'm going to push this into a particular direction, which we could talk about a little bit further. I think that's very interesting because I feel like that's very important, because if you think about like your general people with like overbearing moms who are like being super protected, who are not out there in the world, are not experiencing the world as they are supposedly expected to, like your mama's boy, like, and it kind of dovetails with like comic book fans, right? Like there's an interesting intersection with that, and I think it's really important because it's, in many ways, it's where the character finally becomes free, and
Right.
That's what the staircase scene is about, and it's where he's finally able to kind of be his own person. And like I'm not totally sure where I'm going with this, but I feel like for me that was a very important scene, and I think it means a lot of different things across the board.
Right. Did you feel this point leading up to this, in the 5 minutes, 10 minutes that followed or preceded it, or that he was more conflicted with society and how he was treated within society? Do you feel like that you got any of that coming in from the narrative?
I felt like after he killed his mom, he didn't care anymore.
Okay.
Right, because then he just became comfortable with who he was, like,
right.
and that's where all of his confidence came from, right? Like he went on the show, and then he more or less controlled the flow of that interview, right? And like he just had, like, he was a completely different person.
Well, he just went in being disruptive. Yeah, he just
right. Well, he eliminated the shackles
right.
that he had, and we can argue what was it all like his mom, like, and what aspects of his mom, like one side of that is he had to take care of her, and now that she's dead, like he can do whatever, right. Or that she was domineering him. Like there's a lot of layers.
Don't you think the narrative should be focusing on diving further into what you're just
I actually
you're talking
don't
about right now?
Because I feel like it's up to I'm not necessarily saying that the movie is smart enough to be ambiguous in order to elicit a response from different types of people. But I will say that is certainly an unintended consequence, right? Like you and I can have completely different perspectives on the purpose behind that, right? Like if I came from an environment where my mom was completely domineering, and then I see like him killing his mom as something like completely liberating, like that's my perspective, right? And you might have something completely different, but I think it is a turning point, and right. I think it's an important one.
No, within the narrative, with what he does there, I go, okay, this is where we're going with the movie. This is that character's arc. Now, prior to that, by the way, just to kind of close this chapter here, is that going back to Zazie Beetz' character, again, she was there were scenes with, Arthur Fleck while his mother was in the hospital. She's sitting next to him. And of course, you eventually find out after he realizes that he reads the file and he sees that he was abused. The first thing that he does is go home and he breaks into Zazie Beetz' place. Why would he do that if he was under the, and again, that was the moment where he did realize, like, wait a minute, this is all kind of in my head. Like, he just broke in her place and the movie implies that he killed her. It doesn't flat out say it, but you hear the ambulance, the sound is there for a reason when he goes back to his apartment and,
Right.
takes his hand in his head. So the movie didn't go that far to showing it, because I don't think this film would make $1 billion at the box office if it went that far. But still, why would that character break into her? Because that door wasn't open, especially in this climate that they're setting up here in the early 80s and during the garbage strike and such like that, and with the crime is being overrun by in Gotham. Why would he do that? I don't understand that. That's not connected to what the narrative is set up so far.
I think that, well, it's interesting. So this is, as an aside, you and I know, and perhaps other listeners know, Todd Phillips kind of went on the record as saying he did not kill her.
Oh, he did. Okay, he said that.
But I will say that when you create art and you release it into the world, it almost doesn't matter what your intentions are, right? If 99% of the population assumes something, then it's...
Yeah, because sound mixing, dude, if you hear in that scene, you hear the sirens are getting closer and closer, and then you hear someone knock on a door that seems to be on that floor. Well, that sound was in there for a reason, and that's not by mistake. I mean, you can say what you want after the fact, but that's there for a reason. That's why when we saw it, because I watched it the first time at 42nd Street, really fitting with the mood of the movie, because there were mice running around the Dolby Prime Theater on 42nd Street. But then we watched it in IMAX, and the sound is so good, so clear where you heard that. So again, that's something where when I watched it the second time when we saw it, I was like, holy crap, he killed her. Again, could be wrong. Okay, fine. There was another door on that floor, but at least that's what the narrative told me.
The thing about that is the Joker is a reprehensible character,
right?
And what I think is interesting is, so we look at the Joker, and I'll actually extend it to characters like Deadpool, or even like Harley Quinn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like these anti-heroes that are kind of lauded and people love them, but like they're not. Like the Joker is awful. Deadpool is pretty terrible. Like I don't care that he supposedly kills bad people.
Right.
Like he still kills people. Like
right.
It's really
bad
interesting
people,
to see how these.
But the tone of the movie is not taking. I mean, they could take Deadpool. Let me ask you this question: is Deadpool the comics? Is the tone of the comics ever really dark like this, for instance?
Well, I think Deadpool first kind of originally started out not the same character that he is now, with like that fourth wall breaking kind of meta aspect. But sticking just with the movies, I guess for now, like, I guess, a lot of people see the Joker and they support him and they root for him. And you're never supposed to root for him. Like his arc is very tragic, of course. And there were probably many instances where that could have been prevented. But what he becomes is awful. He is a monster.
But the thing is, where I kind of also, it's more frustrating as when I watch the movies, because again, you're there to see things from his perspective from the first, for the first half of the movie as it goes further. But then again, he goes off the rails. The thing is, then he gets to the point where he's going to be, like you said, he's free, and then he's being chased by the cops, and then he's on the subway. And then everything that kind of goes down with them, I go, okay, it's an incredibly tense scene, well done. But then he makes it to the Murray show, and he's backstage, and then he says, hey, can you call me what you called me the first time when he was on the show, when he was on the TV, which again, we didn't bring this up, but when I watched this movie for the first time, I, again, with knowing the King of Comedy references, as I mentioned, where he was in the audience, where Arthur Fleck was in the audience, you knew it was all going on in his mind. But then, of course, as the movie goes on, Arthur Fleck has his first time where he's standing up in front of an audience. It fails. Zazie Beetz is in the audience in that specific scene. But then that taping, that mic, when he was the MC, when he was doing his set that night, that was sent to Robert De Niro's. It was so bad that it was sent to be put on national television, and then Arthur Fleck sees this televised while he's in the hospital with his mother. I'm going, is this all going on in his head? So again, I'm thinking, is it pulling another King of Comedy thing? But then
Well, the King of Comedy doesn't really go in that direction. Like he has like the set in like his room or whatever, and he pretends to do these sets, and it's very different. Like it's you can say it's an homage, but to keep making like these direct comparisons, like it's not 100% the same.
No, but I'm being
So
trained
I'm
to
a
think
little
that's going to
hesitant.
happen. I'm already being trained because that scene in the audience is going, okay, that that didn't happen. But then wait, did this? It's kind of in line with the talk show. So like, wait, is this going on in his head? So I'm already being trained because you've planted that seed.
Right, but that's not the King of Comedy, right? Like I don't, and perhaps I'm misremembering it, and maybe listeners can set me straight, but the King of Comedy is more about like he kind of rehearses his act and he does this stuff. He only gets on like the show or whatever like when he finally like
Right.
kidnaps or commits a
But there were
crime.
the
So
scenes when he had conversations with him, the fake conversations in his mind with the Jerry Lewis character.
right,
Right.
right.
That
Yeah,
does
I
as
mean,
well.
it's a little differently. I'm not gonna, I don't want to split hairs too much on this because that's not
Sure.
really
Well,
what I'm
yeah, I'm just
thinking
bringing
of.
that up because I'm being trained by this movie because the seed they
Right.
planted where I'm expecting this, but then so even when he's on the way to the actual to when he's going to be a guest appearance on the Murray show, I'm going, is this going on in his head? I'm so confused at this point. I'm like, okay, I guess it's not. And then it gets to the point where he says, "Oh, can you?" He mentions to Robert De Niro and Mark Maron in that scene where he says, "Can you bring me out and introduce me as Joker?" And I go in my mind, "Wait, was that even mentioned?" I'm not even sure. So okay, that's in his head. I'm not. And then of course he comes out and, like you said, he's disruptive. He's taking control of the show at that point. But this is the main part of the movie where he's not going on the show when he goes on his rant. He's not talking about the situation he had with his mother, which is what the narrative kind of led to that point. Of course, it wouldn't be fitting in that moment, but he shifts his attention towards society treating him poorly. And that's the problem I have with the movie because, first of all, there is nothing in that character. There's nothing to lead us believe that character would do that at this point in the movie. Do you agree?
I would agree conditionally because there were some scenes setting that up. He was treated poorly by his social worker, and
Right, but
that's like a completely other separate conversation. There's the scene on the bus where like the lady like doesn't want him kind of interacting with his
right.
child. Like there's stuff here or there, like how he's treated at the workplace. Like it wasn't as much of a curveball as perhaps you might have perceived, but at the same time, I would be willing to acquiesce to the fact that yeah, maybe it did come out of left field.
Like I mentioned with the seed, with the King of Comedy thing, well, the seed should be there prior to leading up to it to go, okay, well, this makes sense. Because otherwise, yeah, it's kind of like, all right, well, was it really bothering you? No, because over the last half hour, it's all been the discovery of what had happened with your relationship with your mother. And that's been the foundation, or so it does kind of come like it's shitting. Like I think I said it when we saw it. I'm like, I was on board the movie. Then all of a sudden, at the end, he just shit all over the place. And the movie definitely takes the time to plant in the dancing that he does, but none of this, nothing really kind of adding more substance to make it make sense for us on why he's doing this, he's acting like this, where we haven't gotten any signs of that preceding.
I do think the signs were there, but I will agree that perhaps it was rushed in the third act because it to its detriment, that third act wanted to communicate way too much information that this movie probably should have. Like it could have ended. It didn't need to go into like all of those areas that it did. Like we didn't need to see the Thomas Martha Wayne murder. The riots were a bit much where he's kind of exalted and elevated at the end. Like I see why they wanted to do that. I don't think it was necessary, but again, like it clearly had an agenda and it needed to get to from point A to point B in the running time.
To cap it off, I mean, I think that, again, when he's going on that rant on the show, he's saying it's society that made me this way. No, because you've been upset that you've discovered that your mom has been, you've been abused as a kid, and that's why you're the way you are in your mind. Right? But the thing is, the focus is all over the place. It becomes pretty much like a sampler. It's like we brought up all these topics, these themes, but how are we dealing with it? I think that's where it just fails.
Right. It's almost like you pick what resonates with you. Like you and I watch
That's
it.
why people coming out of the movie, you're like, oh, I read this resonated with me. This did too. Yeah, but it was a sampler. You didn't do a deep dive. It's all surface level.
Right.
So
right.
then the movie's trying really hard. It's trying really hard. And to really say something substantial, but I go away going, this is a mess.
I don't disagree, but I do give it credit for tackling that, at least trying, like,
not
as
sticking
clumsy,
the landing,
as clumsy as it was.
And then you slap on Joker. And again, I know you don't have a problem with the movie being called Joker, but then I go, well, if you're gonna tackle these heavy topics like this, do you really have to call this Joker? Couldn't you just
if it wasn't called Joker, then I think we would be even more unkind to it, right? Because then it would have been completely clumsy, and we'd be like, "This is ridiculous." But the Joker
wouldn't be talking about it because the movie probably wouldn't get financed.
Well, by calling it the Joker, it elevates it to, like, it's a comic movie, so it's got to be good because, like, what was the most sophisticated comic book movie before that? Like, I couldn't even name it because there probably isn't one.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all up for, hey, if Martin Scorsese directed and he was offered, I believe, to direct this movie.
And he refused.
Yeah, because he's been down,
Well, he has opinions about that, so.
But again, I go with, what are you trying to achieve with the story you're trying to tell? Did you achieve it? And this movie is kind of all over the place. And I leave going, want to love it, want to really like it. You got the elements in place. You got the casting right. You got a great cinematographer. It's the script that's just, again, and it worked for a lot of people. I'm in a minority here.
Ultimately, I mean, I think the movie does demand a certain amount of recognition for trying to be a bit more serious, a bit more deep. But at the same time, like, and I think you brought this up, if it wasn't called the Joker, we would have demanded more. I think we do let it slide because it is called the Joker and it is a comic book movie. So, I would say that it's kind of middle of the road there. Like, it's a bit of an elevated comic book movie. It's a very weak regular movie.
There you go. That's kind of it. So our next episode, should we aim for Parasite since we've kind of brought it up a few times in this episode?
Yeah, I think let's go with Parasite because I feel like equally it has amazing cinematography, amazing performances, and does, shoot for tackling kind of those societal issues, but obviously does so way better.
Yeah. One last thing I do want to mention about this that I forgot to mention is the supporting actors. I know we gave a lot of praise to Joaquin Phoenix, but I think you had the mother of Joaquin. She was great in terms of performances, and Brian Tyree Henry is in it as well for one scene. He was great, and like I said, we brought up Zazie Beetz, but even Robert De Niro. It didn't seem like he wanted to really play that part.
Robert De Niro, like I would not say he did a good job in this movie, and I'm a big De Niro fan, but. I just was not impressed with his performance.
I think he was great in that last scene, though. When things got really tense, he was really great in that. Everything leading up to him getting shot in the eye. That scene was really good. He was great there. But in terms of being committing to being a David Letterman type, late night talk show host,
right.
I can definitely see him.
But isn't it very interesting? So you and I would agree that there are a lot of elements that really succeed with this movie, but yet neither of us would ever commit to saying that it was like a fantastic or fine piece of cinema, despite having the earmarks of a good piece of cinema.
They're all there.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. I did, and this movie set in the early '80s or late '70s, I believe. I just wish that it was set in present day. Why Robert De Niro would be basically doing carpool karaoke with Arthur Fleck.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, luckily we didn't have to endure that.
But that was our take on Joker, and I'm sure we're both in the minority here. You liked it more than me, I guess.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say I was far more lenient on it than you. But you also saw it like 2 times in 1 week.
Well, second time in IMAX.
To paraphrase the Joker, like, you get what you fucking deserve.
There you go. That's a great note to end on. Well, guys, it's been great talking about this movie, and we'll see you next time.
See you next
all right?
time. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to not miss a single bounce.
We'll catch you next time. And don't forget to leave reviews on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you listen to Movie Bounce.